Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 3. Then the Lord answered Job, and out of the whirlwind, and said, Who is this that darkeneth my counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. This is Matt Singleton with Bible Smack. Now I'm doing a response video today with to an atheist named Venaloid. Alright, I'm guessing that's his code name, but anyway. And Venaloid is kind of interesting. He's responding to the Christian presuppositionalist apologetic. And basically it is a strategy where we talk about the presuppositions of what one believes, and we start kind of taking things down, kind of underneath as far as the foundations of the knowledge. And so Venaloid, as an atheist, basically he has to defend how it is that atheists have a epistemological understanding of knowledge and truth. So he gives his argument. I think overall, I reviewed about 2 or 3 of his videos. Seen a couple others. For the most part, I was impressed by the fact that he's kind of operating as rationally as he can, and he's not resorting to a bunch of cuss words. I think one time I saw him cuss, but for the most part, he's kind of keeping it pretty rational there, and I appreciate that. So basically, he says that atheists can account for logic, and they have to rely on a form of philosophy, on their epistemology. They call it empiricism. Okay, Christians sometimes are empirical, but they don't have to rely on empiricism, while atheists typically solely do that unless they just don't believe in any knowledge at all. That would be nihilism. Well, one thing I kind of noticed with the video is that, a lot of times they like to subject the concept of God to a immanent, stuck-in-the-universe type of level. Where, God, yeah, He does kind of flow in the universe in many periods, in many ways, and probably through the person of the Holy Spirit, but God is also transcendent, and really at the core, at the beginning creation, it's essential to His definition that He's transcendent. So when they redefine God, they put Him underneath, does He hold up to the laws of logic, and does He hold up to our evidence and stuff like that? At that point, they're trying to redefine God. Now, as I said, God does do things immanently within creation. It's just that He operates on both levels, inside of time and outside of time. Now, I think one place where I'm seeing a fail here as far as their ability to account for evidence kind of goes back to what I'd seen with Einstein and his explanation of why he believes in God. And where that goes is that in order to, for me to see something, it has to be seeable. So in other words, I have the senses. I have the sight, I have the smell, and whatever. And then it has the ability to be sensed. Why did the universe come out in a way to where organisms could exist in it, could be able to sense anything from it? There are many times where this doesn't quite work out the way we would like to, but essentially, for empirical knowledge, we have to kind of, assume that there is that design, okay, that this is able to be assumed. Now, when we say, can you account for logic, all right, as a Christian, I think there's an omnipotent being who designed the universe. And therefore, since God is an omnipotent being and He designed the universe, I have to figure out His design, and He already knows the blueprint. But now, if there is no designer to the universe and everything is chaos, then logic is stuck inside me. I'm the one coming up with the ideas, and then we kind of go over some concepts like mathematics, and physics, psychology, all these different mental faculties and stuff, all these concepts are not really out there in the world. They're just my construction of them. So if it's just my construction and there is no designer, well, then everything starts to get hazy, because then I got to ask, how is it that we really know that this is what it is? And we break this down, not just, you know, kind of like, here I am and I'm so scholarly and let's kind of look at this as a scientist, but, you know, let's look at the beginning points of human civilization. Let's look at times from a baby. Babies pick up language. How do they pick up language? I mean, like, people use different words differently. And we have different languages and different dialects, and yet you sit a kid down and, you know, after 2 or 3 years of age, they typically start to pick up words. They start to have language. Why is it they can pick up any language that you give them? On the opposite end, if you had a person raised without any language, they wouldn't be able to think properly. They wouldn't be able to have understanding. Okay, they've had these instances where somebody gets raised by wolves or maybe apes or something like that, and they come out, you know, kind of, you know, they can't really think or talk or communicate. And because they can't think in words and communicate, since they weren't taught that, they come out kind of stupid. And yet, at the same time, there's an innate knowledge because they're able to pick up something. And, you know, when we talk about our 5 senses, all right, if, according to empiricism, everything we get from the outside world is our senses, well then, how do I start my thought process? Because there are sometimes when I see something, and I hear something, and I might not hear what I see. For instance, okay, if I have an itch right here, and I feel like what we call in Kentucky chiggers, okay? If you feel a chigger, you ain't going to see that, okay? You just felt something, but you didn't see it. Alright, on the opposite end, maybe if I'm doing some isometric exercises, and sometimes like when we're little, we press our arms up against the door and hold it for about a minute or so, okay? And you just press as hard as you can up against the door like that. When you let go, all of a sudden, your arms feel like, you know, flapping a little bit, okay? Why is it that you feel a sensation, but you don't see anything moving yet? Okay, well, what I'm talking about here is that in the process of our experience, we have to have some sort of knowledge inside us that says, that's right, that's not right. Okay, so we have to have this innate knowledge. Alright, and at the same time, we don't have it in and of itself. So there's a lot of deeper issues that we go into when we try to figure out how it is we have a certainty of things. Because remember, if I am, you know, an island unto myself, if I have to determine what the universe is, I've got to do it, and I've got to make it totally consistent. While the Christian there is like, oh, you guys live by faith. Okay? Alright, so we admit that we live by faith. You know what that means? That means I have faith that God has a design. I'm just trying to figure out His design. I could be right about His design, and I could be wrong about His design, but it's His design, it's not mine. But then I have to interpret everything, you know, in order to have any certainty and to have authority of knowledge, I have to interpret everything correctly. If I'm off by something, everything goes haywire. Okay, so we have to properly interpret the universe. This is kind of funny because of science is changing every day. Okay, and they'll go with one theory, and they'll skip it, trash it, and throw it with another. You know, one minute they used to have space made of ether, then it was made of nothing, now it's made of dark matter. You know, and I haven't studied deep enough to know about antimatter and stuff like that. But I know that these concepts go back and forth. And when they first had the Big Bang, they didn't have dark matter, now they do. Every calculation goes back and forth. They're constantly changing something. What about quantum loop mechanics? Okay? What if that was right and we should have stopped doing the string theory? Alright? Well, the thing is like people are going to go with one or go with another, or they'll trash one, and then you totally forget it. Uh-oh, what if they were right back then? You got to start everything all the way over again. And then, you know, what happens is conducts what we call the inductive fallacy. You see, you can only know how much you've sensed. Alright? You can't go beyond what you have not sensed. All right, two ways I do this. I will talk about if we had a pool and there's a bunch of marbles in the pool, and I grab a little bowl and I scoop out the marbles of the pool, and I find 9 blue marbles and 1 red marble. Then I say, okay, well then the whole pool is 90% blue and 10% red. Not necessarily. Okay, I'm just gambling on that because I don't have sensory perception of the entire pool. I haven't counted it all. If I tied you down, and we were at an airport, I tied you down and I gave you a rope, and that rope went out as far as you could see, okay, all the way as far as you could see. Somebody comes up to you and they say, you know, that rope is about 5,000 feet. Another guy says, you know, that rope, it's about 100 miles. How do you know? Well, you really don't know what you don't know. That's the inductive fallacy. We only know what we can actually observe and ascertain. And what we do is we gamble on the whole rest of the universe. We say, well, everything, we're going to assume it's the same, and then we'll calculate up. But we're assuming, we're gambling. And we gamble on all the sciences that way. So how much authority are you really going to have? Now, when we talk about God, we say, well, what about this concept of God and that concept of God? Well, you say, well, I don't believe in God, this concept. God was here regardless of venaloid, regardless of me, regardless of my great cameraman Jeremy. It doesn't matter, okay? God was here historically. He's a historical character, okay? I don't sit there and debate whether or not Alexander the Great existed. He was part of history. He was experienced. People saw him, people wrote him down, they observed him. That was done. Okay? You have a complete genealogy in the book of Genesis that goes all the way back to God. And you have God interacting with several characters at one time in the Garden of Eden. Several characters, all of them seeing, all of them talking to him. And then you have God in several other stories as we move on down. You see God in Noah, you see God in Abraham, yada, 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 yada. Okay? And you can do that throughout the entire Bible. But we especially start there. God was historically active and immanent right there. So what does that mean? That means that he's not simply a concept I can make up and alter. He's a reality, and then I have to kind of figure out why he's a reality. All right? So, you know, Genesis is a historical book, you know, and we've seen that with archaeological stuff. We've also seen the fact that the only alternative is pagan history. Evolutionary history doesn't come into play, okay, because evolution is something that was not observed. They never had the story of the day that the monkey became a human, okay. That, if they did, they probably wouldn't have said, like in the 1800s, well, it was the orangutan, and they say, no, it was the chimp, and they said, no, it was the half-man. No, it was a species of primate that we haven't discovered yet, okay, or Lucy. You know, they don't do that, okay, because it was history, it was experience, it was written down, recorded observation. All right, so that's what you have to understand, and it's like, you know, I'm not dealing with a concept that I'm making up. I'm dealing with this book, okay. I have this given to me providentially. God has put it into my hand through the blood of hundreds of thousands of people, okay, that weren't allowed to read this book. They kept on translating it anyway, okay, and they got it to me. All right. When it says, well, how does a Christian understand, you know, the truth? Okay, well, how do I know? I mean, I wasn't reading the Bible. Fair question, okay? Obviously, when I was 2 or 3, I wasn't reading the Bible. But God gave us all something called the human experience, and we had to live it. We have reality. Then we got to figure out what we're going to do with reality. You could say that reality was illusion like the Buddhists. You could say that reality is something that we know sort of, and then Revelation gives me the rest. Or you could say that reality is some constantly changing thing that we got to look through a microscope in, and maybe one day we'll get a new, totally different understanding. Either which way, reality is what we have to deal with as we grow up, as we mature. So when we have this conversation, we're having this conversation as people who've already experienced a couple years of reality in order to talk. Okay? So I understand why that is, because God gave that to me. He gave me those experiences. He gave me a world. He gave me an earth. I think something earlier to talk about was, I'm glad you're catching on to this concept, because we did have a perfect world. We did have, humans are vegetation, everything was not what we have today. It is deteriorated, and everything has kind of gone downhill. But we had that, and we don't have that no more. So that's where we get into confusion, is that we have this deteriorated society. We have things, such as animals that rip each other apart. We have things like cancer, okay? And those things are the result of sin. That's all thoroughly explained through the history we've experienced. Now, one thing is that in order to, as a materialist, one thing you have to prove is you have to prove how the material world can account for the immaterial world. So what you did was you talked about computers. You said they got the hardware and then they got the software. All right. There's two major fallacies to saying that the human mind that comes up with the concepts like calculus, okay, the geometry, trigonometry, all this kind of stuff. All right, the human mind that comes up with concepts that we don't find in the dirt, we don't find in the trees, don't find in the cows. That ability, okay, it's immaterial, and when I look at the computer, I look at something that's designed, okay, so there had to be a transcendent creator to a computer, but even more importantly, it doesn't have a mind, so it's not a fair comparison, okay? The computer doesn't know the keyboard. The computer doesn't know the letters on the screen. The computer is a machine that you put and you create it to make it translated from the pushing of a button to an electronical letter. Okay? But it doesn't read it. I read it in my brain. So it's still immaterial. It's still not part of this world. You put an ape or a cow in front of that computer, you're not going to get much. Okay? Because basically there is no mind in the computer, so that we haven't gotten to that level. We only get to that level when the minds interact with each other. And let me see if there's anything else I wanted to react to. Basically, when we talk about comprehension of the Bible, I know that there are some Christians that teach that you have no ability to comprehend, that you have no mind to just understand the Bible and stuff like that. That's not where I'm coming from, okay? God gave us all minds. God cares about us all. He wants to reason with us, all right? And Isaiah 1:18, come now, let us reason, all right? So I don't think the problem is your ability to comprehend. You might be able to comprehend the Bible on a very superior level. I mean, I know that you seem like you're a pretty intellectual guy. Okay, your chords, your function, everything seems to be functioning pretty good to me. All right, but when you go about doing this process, okay, of understanding, you might be able to understand what's in the Bible, but on a moral level, there might be something in you that says, "Oh, you're calling me a sinner? Oh, I am just so unworthy that I have to go to hell? How dare you talk about me that way, Bible?" And that repulsion, that moral disdain will cause you to say, this has to be irrational, so let me seek out an alternative system. So this immorality causes you to do less logical systems and less logical ways of living. Okay? So it's not that you have the mental problem, you have the mind already there, but the morality, okay, the spiritual depravity that caused you to disdain that which is what we call holy, has caused you to say, let me try something else. Okay? And what I have to say to that is that we all have a time where we're going to kind of like get off our high horse. Alright? We're going to say, alright, I don't really know what's going on. Maybe one day you get stuck in the hospital and you're like, okay, I really don't have any time. And I don't know what's in the afterlife. Okay? And I have to face that. Well, I'll say this. The thing that's so persuasive, that really makes everything morally right, is the fact that the God of the Bible, who is historically presented, who's already made himself known, that guy has offered his love and his sacrifice to you. You can be saved. Alright, so you say, what about this and what about that? What about the fact that you can be saved? If you get saved, you'll be pretty happy about it. And then, if you start worrying about what about all these other people, well, then you go and tell them. That's what you do. Alright? And there's other things, but we will probably catch you later about that on Bible Smack.